Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live, where we're talking about today's hottest topics on policy and faith and other areas of the culture. We always do that from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. My name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach. I'm here with David Barton. He's America's premier historian and the founder of WallBuilders. Tim Barton is a national speaker and pastor and the president of WallBuilders. And all three of us are just thrilled that you're here with us on WallBuilders Live because it tells us you're interested in knowing what to do in the culture, in our society, in this nation, how to use the freedoms that we've been given to do our part, fulfill our responsibilities that come with our rights. Everybody loves to talk about the rights under the Constitution, but what about the responsibilities? And if you're listening today, we know that you want to be a part of the solution. You want to fulfill those responsibilities. And so our goal is to equip and inspire, to entertain, yes, to have a fun program that's entertaining with lots of great information, but also to equip and inspire you. We want to make sure you have the tools you need to go out there and make a difference in your culture and in your society. If you want to help us do that and spread the word and reach more people, you can do that very simply by going to wallbuilderslive.com, click on the contribute button, and that's a great way to come alongside us. Those dollars, every time you make a contribution, it expands our voice. It allows us to reach more people through more stations, through more programs. We train pastors and young leaders. We train legislators. There's all kinds of things that we're doing with the dollars that you donate, and it helps to impact the culture in a positive way. You can become a force multiplier by going to the website today and making that contribution right there at wallbuilderslive.com. All right, guys, Mark Perry is going to be with us from American Enterprise Institute here in a few minutes, but he's going to be talking about the data that he does every year on the size of the U.S. economy. I think this is great for us because we've been saying these things for years, and we are big-time proponents of the concept of American exceptionalism, that we are the exception to the rule. And sometimes people claim we're being Pollyanna, that we're just waving the flag, we're just, American braggers, right? We're just bragging about who we are. And I know as Texans, we do tend to brag a lot. But I mean, as Americans, that American exceptionalism does exist. Today, we're going to learn, this is some of the statistics, some of the data that backs up what we've all three been saying in presentations around the country. Here's an economist from American Enterprise Institute showing some of these things.
Well, the thing I think that's hard for people to grasp is, okay, America's got the biggest economy in the world. We have a huge GDP. We're 4% of the population, 24, 25, 26% of the GDP. So what? I've got an 8-to-5 job, and I'm working my tail off, put the kids through college and do what I need. We don't understand the trickle-down effect of that big economy on every one of us. You take something just as economic prosperity. Why is it that with those that live in poverty in America, if they live in poverty in America, and we're not condoning that, we're not saying that's a good deal, but I'll point out that if you live in poverty in America, you have more square footage of living space than the average middle class in Europe. Now, why is it that in the rest of the world, the greatest medical malady with poverty is stuntedness, malnutrition, thinness? In America, the greatest problem the poor have in America is obesity. There is a real consequence that goes to every single person from living in this nation. And even though you might be among the poor by comparing everyone else in the nation, when you compare America to the rest of the world, there is a huge statistical difference. And that GDP, and maybe none of us can even recognize what a trillion means or how many trillion the American economy is worth. Nonetheless, that has a trickle-down effect on every single one of us in creating a lifestyle of prosperity that most people in the world can't grasp. You're right, Rick. It is a statistical measurement of American exceptionalism.
And guys, one of the things that we often will point out, I think it's worth noting again, especially during the summer when we work with a lot of young people, one of the things I tell young people is if you want to really get a perspective of America, you need to get with your church and go on a mission trip to a third world nation. Go spend some time around the rest of the world because we really don't have a great perspective of how blessed we are as Americans because we don't realize the lack that other nations have. And again, going on a mission trip to a third world nation, when you start seeing how some of these nations live, you go, oh my goodness, the things that we take for granted, right? How as Americans, we've been so spoiled in areas, how we really, our focus has been so distracted. Some of these economic things that seem beyond us in the sense of what the average American understands, what they comprehend, the GDP, the growth, the wages of salary, the increase of things that all we really recognize is what's in our pocketbook, but our standard of living has become so exorbitant, so to speak, that we often in America, we live off of our wants and not our needs. And we confuse our wants and our needs. But when you look at the rest of the world, you realize, wow, we are so extremely blessed to be Americans. But even saying that, most Americans have no idea how blessed they are. And this is something that it's so interesting seeing some of these studies to recognize how productive our nation is that helps us enjoy some of these blessings. We really are an incredibly productive nation when it comes to what we are able to do on an economic perspective.
Yeah, Professor Mark Perry actually kind of helped break this down, maybe where we can get our head around it a little bit. He says, well, if you happen to live in the state of Alabama, your economy is actually bigger and better than, and he'll give you a nation in the world. You go, oh my gosh, you mean Alabama, one of those poor southern states? They're actually better off than the entire nation of whatever. And so he's done a map to show every state. He compares it to a nation to show how that every state outproduced, and he shows the nation they outproduced. And it's astounding to see the comparisons of a single state to a nation or a chain of nations. And you're going, oh my gosh, I had no idea my state was like this. It'll be a fascinating interview. We saw the map online, and we just got enthralled with it, looking at the comparisons he made. They were great.
Stay with us, folks. Mark Perry, our special guest today. You're listening to WallBuilders Live. Hey, friends. Rick Green here from WallBuilders Live. What do Dennis Prager, Larry Elder, Ben Shapiro, Rick Green, Tim Barton, David Barton, what all these folks have in common other than the fact that they're conservative commentators that defend the Constitution and educate America on the Constitution? They're all raving about Front Sight Firearms Training Institute. In fact, if you go to my website right now today at rickgreen.com, you can watch the video of Dennis Prager training at Front Sight, or Larry Elder training at Front Sight, or Tim Barton and myself training out there at Front Sight. It's an opportunity for you to learn how to defend yourself and your family, to make sure that you're ready and able to do that. It is a fantastic place to train. They train literally 30,000, 40,000 people a year, and they're just wonderful to work with. And you can go with us. We're headed back out. We're going to have a great time out there as the WallBuilders family. And if you're a supporter of WallBuilders, we have an amazing deal for you. It's actually going to cost you 1/10 the normal price to attend this 2-day handgun training because you're going with us, and you'll also get the Constitution crash course. I'll be teaching on the Constitution. You get the intellectual ammunition that you need to defend the Second Amendment and our Constitution, as well as getting the physical training on how to defend yourself and your family. And this is for everyone, guys, gals, everyone should take this class. No matter how much you've shot your whole life or if you've never touched a gun, learn how to defend your family. We're going to be going several times throughout the year, and we would love to have you be a part of that. Check out rickgreen.com today to find out the dates and all the specifics and get all of your questions answered. Check out rickgreen.com today to join us on this Front Sight trip for both your constitutional and your handgun defense training. Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us today. Mark Perry is with us. He's a scholar over at American Enterprise Institute and a professor of economics and finance at the University of Michigan. But you can read him on his Carpe Diem blog about economics. He actually makes it interesting. And my son, who's a economics grad and master and all that stuff, loves you. And he was smart enough to get an A&M. I wasn't, so I had to go to University of Texas. But anyway, Mark, thank you for coming on, brother. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, glad to be on your show.
Hey, man, thanks for what you do. And we were very curious about this comparison of individual states in the United States and their GDP being even larger, just one state, than, the United Kingdom, for instance, or even Canada. We forget how big we are in the world economy.
Well, that's right, Rick. And so I do this every year when the new data come out. So I've been doing it for 5 or 6 or 7 years just to help people understand how big the U.S. economy is, because now last year in 2019, the United States produced about $21.5 trillion of economic output. And, once you get up into the trillions of dollars, it's just so large. The numbers are so large that it's hard to even for people to understand how big those numbers are. So
yeah.
Instead of looking at $21.5 trillion, I think it's easier for people to understand how big the U.S. economy is by looking at this map that I create every year that shows U.S. states that are matched for countries around the world that have GDP that is close to the output of these of our U.S. states as a way to help understand how enormous the U.S. economy is and what an economic powerhouse it is, and make people understand how big it is, and maybe make people kind of appreciate how big the U.S. economy is. And to be alive in the United States in such a huge economy, I mean, it's basically you've already won the lottery of life just by being in the United States, and this helps kind of demonstrate how big the U.S. economy is and how fortunate we are to be living in such a huge, large market economy.
Yeah, you're so right, and especially at a time when, most of our campuses across the country are, running down America and talking about how bad we are. This is such an important thing to point out. Hey, look, these principles that our nation was built upon and that we hold dear have produced incredible prosperity, incredible wealth, and as you said, just to be born here puts you way ahead of everyone else around the world. Put it in practical terms for us, like take what you teach there in Michigan. What's a country that the Michigan economy is comparable to?
Well, the state of Michigan in 2018 was equivalent to the entire economic output of Thailand. And, some of our bigger states like, California is equivalent to the entire economy of the United Kingdom. And as a separate economy would be the fifth largest economy in the world.
Wow.
And then our two Texas, where I think you're at, right?
Yeah, Texas, absolutely.
Okay, so Texas would be equivalent to the entire economic output of all of Canada, and would be the 10th largest economy in the world. And then
okay, wait, Mark, you got to pause on that one, man. I got a lot of friends up in Canada, and some of them listen to this program, so I really want to rub this in for a moment. Just Texas by itself. It's the same as the entire country of Canada.
It's the same output as Canada. Well, let's see, how does it match up? Well, actually, Texas did produce just slightly more economic output in 2018 than Canada did. They're up just both below about $2 trillion. But then I think when I adjusted for the size of the labor force, Canada has 20 million workers, and this, so it's almost 50% larger than the labor force in Texas, which is about 14 million. So we produce the same amount of output, but Canada has about 6 million more workers in their economy than we do. So again, it's just another way to show and demonstrate how productive U.S. workers are. So it's not just the size of the U.S. economy, but also in terms of output per person.
So you say that so much nicer than I would, Mark. See, I like to rub it in. So I would say we're just harder working, man. We just we put our elbows in and put that grease in a lot harder. I mean, that really is used to be something we took pride in, right? That Americans worked hard, that we had that strong work ethic, but that's not even much of the conversation anymore. But that is such an important piece of this kind of output, right?
Well, yeah, we have a world-class economy. We have world-class workforce, and we're, in terms of output per person, we're among the highest in the world. And so it's just a way for people really should take a little more pride in the U.S. economy. And as you mentioned, the U.S. economy and its history is integrated, grade schools and high schools and colleges. And I just try to point out all of the ways that the U.S. economy is, so large and also so productive, and also generates the highest standard of living for middle-class people compared to any other country in the world. So it's just, again, being alive in America today, you've won the lottery of life, but all we hear about are all of the problems and criticisms and so on. So I try to, help people understand the positive and optimistic way to look at the U.S. economy.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, the standard of living. I mean, that's a way to really bring it home in terms of practical terms. If you're born here, if you live in America, I mean, even if you're in the lower tiers of actual income, I mean, the poorest people in our nation typically have a better standard of living than most people around the world. And we're talking about, eat more red meat, have an air conditioner, have, automobiles. I mean, all of those things that are tangible. Hey, this is quality of life that, as measured by most people, even the poorest in our country tend to do better than most people around the world.
Oh, that's right. I mean, we're living like in this technological world of, advanced miracles. And yeah, we're just complaining about a lot of things. And so I think we should really be a little more grateful, because I've also done a comparison. And if you take, like, let's say the European countries and put them in a ranking with U.S. states based on GDP per capita or GDP, that a lot of the, I guess, it would be adjusted on a per capita basis, that a lot of the European countries would be among the poorest U.S. states. So even though we think of Europe as being equivalent in terms of standard of living, on a per capita income or per capita GDP basis, a lot of the countries in Europe would be ranked along with, Mississippi and Alabama, some of the U.S. poorest states. So again, we don't really ever appreciate how good we have it and how things are getting better all the time. And so I'm trying to kind of communicate that through my blog, and I do that with charts and graphs and tables and Venn diagrams to try to communicate the message, the positive economic message that I think people really should hear more of.
You read my mind, because I actually have your blog pulled up right now looking at some of those graphs. And speaking of that Texas work ethic, you've got one on there showing Texas crude oil production going 5 times, grew more than 5 times in the last 10 years. That's significant. And you also, before I let you go, I got to ask you about this post you had on the Patrick Moore PragerU videos. We're big PragerU fans around here at WallBuilders, and I haven't watched his, but you're saying on there they're really good. So I want to give a little plug here. You even have links to 3 of those.
Yeah, Patrick Moore, I think, is one of the most important voices today, kind of speaking out against the climate hysteria that we hear about from, the teenage climate puppet, Greta Thunberg, and other people who are saying there's such a, we have 10 or 12 years to live. So for a voice of reason and sanity in the whole area of environment and climate change, I would recommend following Patrick Moore. He's active on Twitter. He puts new material up almost every day. He's a former co-founder of Greenpeace, so he has kind of legitimate credentials. He has a PhD in, I think, ecology or something. So he's really an important voice. There's some balance to the climate hysteria and gloom and doom we hear about almost daily.
Carpe Diem is the name of the blog. We'll have a link today at wallbuilderslive.com to make it easy for you to get there. Mark, thanks for doing for economics what I think we here at WallBuilders do for history and government, where most people grow up thinking those subjects are boring. You make it interesting and get people to learn this very important part of what makes our system work so well. So thanks for what you're doing, man. Let's get you back again soon.
Thanks, Rick.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back with David and Tim Barton.
Hi friends, this is Tim Barton of WallBuilders. This is a time when most Americans don't know much about American history or even heroes of the faith, and I know oftentimes for parents, we're trying to find good content for our kids to read, and if you remember back to the Bible, to the book of Hebrews, it has the Faith Hall of Fame, where they outlined the leaders of faith that had gone before them. Well, this is something that as Americans, we really want to go back and outline some of these heroes, not just of American history, but heroes of Christianity and our faith as well. I want to let you know about some biographical sketches we have available on our website. One is called the Courageous Leaders Collection, and this collection includes people like Abigail Adams, Abraham Lincoln, Francis Scott Key, George Washington Carver, Susanna Wesley, even the Wright brothers. And there's a second collection called Heroes of History. In this collection, you'll read about people like Benjamin Franklin or Christopher Columbus, Daniel Boone, George Washington, Harriet Tubman. Friends, the list goes on and on. This is a great collection for your young person to have and read, and it's a providential view of American and Christian history. This is available at wallbuilders.com. That's www.wallbuilders.com.
We're back here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks to Mark Perry for joining us today. And we'll have a link to that map. It really is something to see the visual map, and you can even click on your state and see what your state compares to in terms of another nation around the world. Back with David and Tim Barton. Guys, just great data, and interesting some of the comments he was making about even the videos on PragerU and just some of the pushback against this kind of left-wing philosophy out there, even from guys that helped start Greenpeace.
Well, it's hard for Americans to feel really guilty about themselves if they understand where they are in comparison to everything else in the world. I mean, if you're trying to make us the bad guy and the culprit, that everything in the world that's gone wrong is our fault, that's really hard for us to believe if we find out we're not as bad as we've been told. If we find out that, you know what, we really are producing more and creating more prosperity and creating more freedom. And so I can understand the pushback from the left on this. And he had a one-liner I just thought was priceless. He said, "You've already won the lottery of life just by living in the United States." I go, man, I don't think most people recognize or appreciate that. But when you look at this chart and show what he shows, he's right.
I think it's interesting, too, looking at the chart, how California would be the fifth, if they were their own nation, they would be the 5th largest economy in the world. Texas is second in the U.S., but in comparison to world economies, they would be the 10th largest economy in the world. I thought it's interesting. Texas is not as large or doesn't produce as much as California does, and yet California is going bankrupt, and Texas is not. And so it makes you think it's not only that you are producing something, right? That this is where I see and go, man, leadership makes such a difference. because California has so much, but they're dwindling and they're squandering. They're not doing a great job with what they have. Looking at the numbers, where just looking at California, California has more productivity than the UK. The UK did $2.81 trillion. France did $2.79 trillion. India, $2.61 trillion. California was bigger than all of those. So we're talking nearly $3 trillion a year California does. How in the world with $3 trillion are you having the economic struggles you are in California? But this to me is why it's even fascinating just looking at this map and seeing the level of productivity these states have, that California, the 5th largest economy in the world, that's crazy. But this is how blessed we are to be Americans.
And you point out, they're having troubles there, and it's because of their politics. And something he said struck me on the other side of that politics line, making the same point from a different direction, is that in Texas, our oil production has grown by 5 times. Now, why would that be? Part of it is politics. I don't remember the exact numbers. I'm going to throw out some numbers. These are generally right. But under the Obama administration, to get a permit for drilling took about 18 months. And now it takes about 6 days to get a permit for drilling. So the bureaucracy and paperwork kept you from being productive because you couldn't drill wells. And now you can. And
that doesn't mean that they're still not doing the environmental impact studies, right? Because that would be the argument. Well, it's because President Trump doesn't care about the environment. He's destroying the environment. No. The environmental impact studies are still being done. It's just you're not having to wait 1.5 years before you get the approval after the environmental impact studies. So it's not
And
cheating.
by the way, our technology is so high now that we're actually having cleaner production than we've had in history. We're far ahead of all the other nations. So we're having cleaner air with more production. So you're right, Tim. We haven't lowered the standards. And it's not that we don't care about the economy. Those standards are still there. But man, the difference politics makes, even though we're already so far ahead, politics does have a huge impact.
Hey, quick break, guys. We'll be right back. We're talking about Mark Perry's interview with us today, and we'll have a link today so you can read the article and see the map, see where your state stands in terms of the world economy. Stay with us. You're listening to WallBuilders Live. Hey, friends, if you've been listening to WallBuilders Live for very long at all, you know how much we respect our veterans and how appreciative we are of the sacrifice they make to make our freedoms possible. One of the ways that we love to honor those veterans is to tell their stories here on WallBuilders Live. Once in a while, we get an opportunity to interview veterans that have served on those front lines, that have made incredible sacrifices, have amazing stories that we want to share with the American people. One of the very special things we get to do is interview World War II veterans. You've heard those interviews here on WallBuilders Live, from folks that were in the Band of Brothers to folks like Edgar Harrell that survived the Indianapolis, to so many other great stories you've heard on WallBuilders Live. You have friends and family that also serve. If you have World War II veterans in your family that you would like to have their story shared here on WallBuilders Live, please email us at radio@wallbuilders.com. radio@wallbuilders.com. Give us a brief summary of the story, and we'll set up an interview. Thanks so much for sharing here on WallBuilders Live. We're back here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. Be sure and check out the website today, wallbuilderslive.com, so you can look on the map and see where your state stands in the world economies. But a great reminder for us, David and Tim, just that the American economy has produced such incredible results, and it does impact our actions and the decisions that we make based on how we see our principles. Do our principles actually work? Do the principles from the Declaration of Independence produce good results? According to Mark Perry, absolutely so.
Well, they produce good results, but I'm also struck with the efficiency of how they produce those results. Take Texas. I love the fact that Texas by itself produces more than all of Canada. What a great comparison, as if we needed something else to brag about. But we do it with, as Mark pointed out, nearly 50% less workers. We outproduce them with a much smaller workforce, so our efficiency is so much higher. We take less with fewer people and make it go further than other nations do with more people. Now, I'll point out that Canada has a real government problem, in my opinion. They don't follow limited government principles. They are very heavy-handed and oppressive in many ways. They are very socialist progressive. They're moving more and more towards socialism, so it takes more to produce what they had. But here we are in Texas with 50% less workers than they have, outproducing the entire nation of Canada, and we're just one of 50 states in the U.S. I mean, those numbers are just absolutely fascinating. The further you get into them, the more you appreciate the fact that having the right philosophy of governance, like a constitution, Rick, as you said, the Declaration, choosing the right leaders to go with it, such as Texas leaders versus California leaders, all of that has an impact. But even at that, even if you're in California with Gavin Newsom and others as your leaders, you're still outproducing the United Kingdom. I mean, it's fascinating that we've been so blessed that even if we don't have the best government, we still have outcomes and things that are producing blessings in our lives that we all ought to appreciate and be grateful for.
We're out of time for today, folks. There are more programs available right now at wallbuilderslive.com. You can click in the archive section there. If you're a podcast listener, download those podcasts throughout the week. We have great interviews like the one today with President Munsell from Arizona Christian University, as well as with U.S. senators and congressmen and attorneys that are arguing before the Supreme Court, and individuals just like yourself that are making a difference in their communities, that are some of our Constitution coaches out there that host classes, biblical citizenship classes in their churches, and use the materials that WallBuilders makes available for all kinds of educational opportunities. So all kinds of ways that you can be a part of the solution. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, one of the easiest ways and most important is through dollars. Yes, finances, lives, fortunes, sacred honor. Sound familiar? Right there in the Declaration of Independence. Fortunes was a big part of it. Yes, we've got to invest our dollars in freedom, and one of the best places you can do that is right here at WallBuilders. WallBuildersLive.com. Click on the contribute button. A lot of our folks across the nation give $5 or $15 or $25 a month. Whatever you can do, we greatly appreciate that support. It helps us to expand, reach more people across the nation, and therefore be a part of the solution in saving our constitutional republic for future generations. God bless you. Hope you enjoyed listening today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting.